Welcome to the second webinar in the Obesity Management for GP series, everyone. This webinar is Why is Losing Weight So Difficult and Maintaining Weight Loss Even Harder? The RACGP would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this event is being broadcast, and we pay our respects to the elders past and present. I would now like to take the time to thank our sponsors and advertisers as seen on your screen. We greatly appreciate all their support of the Obesity Management webinar series. Now, to introduce our presenters this evening. Dr. Marlene Tan is a Fellow of the RACGP. She runs Melbourne Weight Loss at Epworth Camberwell, providing a medical weight loss service. She is the Director of Medical and Mind Weight Loss, providing evidence-based medical and psychological online weight management programs aimed for those who live remotely or want to address their weight gain online. Dr. Tam is currently an Honorary Research Fellow at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Melbourne, where her published research includes looking at the impacts of psychotropics on weight gain and the role of the GP in primary care weight management. Dr. Priya Sumitran is an endocrinologist at Austin Health and a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Melbourne Department of Medicine, Austin, where she completed her PhD in 2012. The focus of her PhD was examining hormonal adaptations to weight loss, and she has an ongoing research interest in the physiological regulation of body weight and its application to the clinical care of people with obesity and associated complications.
Thanks everyone for logging in. It's great to have so many interested GPs coming to our second obesity weight management seminar tonight. For those of you who heard Georgia and Cal speak 2 weeks ago, certainly it was a fantastic webinar, and hopefully today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to look at more of the scientific basis behind weight loss and weight management. So our learning objectives today are to explain to patients energy homeostasis and the body's defense against weight loss. There's actually no better person to speak about this than Priya, whose PhD was actually on this. She will also go on to talk about the stages of the Edmonton Obesity Staging System and to summarise how to assign the EOSS score and to identify at-risk patients. I will follow Priya and I'll be talking about some of the most common anti-obesity medications that we can use for weight, talking about indications, contraindications, common side effects, and interactions. As Georgia spoke quite a bit last week about chronic disease model for obesity, I'll just review this topic today and give you a bit of an outline of how to set up a resource system. I will now hand over to Priya, who will begin tonight's seminar.
Thanks, Sally and Marlene. So I thought we'll start with the Edmonton Obesity Staging System first, and then we'll move into body weight regulation because that will lead more smoothly into Marlene's section of the talk. So I'll start just with the complications of excess weight, which are displayed on this slide, and include metabolic complications like diabetes, dyslipidemia or hypertension, as well as mechanical complications and inflammatory related complications like osteoarthritis, as well as an increased risk of certain cancers. And although the risk of complications increases with increasing BMI in populations, and this table demonstrates the WHO classifications of BMI, with obesity being defined as a body mass index greater than 30. The risks of complications increases in populations with increasing BMI. So this slide was taken from the AusDiab study, showing that the blue panel is men, the red is women, the grey is all people combined, showing that the incidence of type 2 diabetes in both sexes and across the population increases with increasing BMI. So it's very good on a population level to tell us about increased risk, but in individuals, BMI is less useful to tell us about that person's actual risk of complications related to the excess weight. So in this slide, for example, with increasing BMI across the bottom, if you focus just on the red dots is showing HOMA-IR, which is a measure of insulin resistance. And you can see that across the whole range of BMI from 20 up to 70, there are people with a lot of insulin resistance and people with very low scores for insulin resistance. So on an individual level, the body mass index isn't really telling us who is going to get complications related to the excess weight. So in 2009, in Canada, some physicians came up with the Edmonton Obesity Staging System as a way to incorporate, rather than just the BMI-centric view of management, to incorporate complications into the staging system for obesity to help guide clinical decision-making. So this is what the system looks like. So it basically integrates medical and functional and psychological comorbidities it's a 5-stage system from stage 0 to stage 4, and stage 0 is no complications at all, up to stage 4, which is end stage of all the complications. So, for example, if you were looking at hypertension or diabetes, stage 0 would be somebody with normal blood pressure or normal blood glucose. Stage 1 would be preclinical or borderline blood pressure and perhaps impaired fasting glucose. Stage 2 is overt disease, so hypertension or diabetes. Stage 3 is the disease plus some sort of end organ damage, like left ventricular hypertrophy or microalbuminuria. And then stage 4 would be severe end-stage disease. So why would we bother doing this? Does it actually mean anything? This study from the same group looked at using this staging system to predict mortality in people with overweight and obesity. So they took data from the NHANES study, which is a longitudinal study of a population representative sample in the US, and they looked at the proportion surviving over the time of follow-up. And you can see in this panel that when they were looking at the people according just to BMI, there wasn't very good separation of the curve. So just based on BMI, you couldn't predict who was going to survive and who was not. Whereas when they separated out according to their Edmonton obesity stage, there was good separation of the curve so that people with stage 0 and 1 obesity survived longer, whereas the prognosis was poor for people with higher stages. Similarly, in the same study, they showed that even within BMI categories, so within just people who are overweight or just people with class 1 or class 2 or class 3 obesity, applying the staging system still was able to separate out in each class people with poorer prognosis than others. So they've proposed that it's used to guide management because a person with stage 0 obesity may not need weight loss interventions or particularly intensive weight loss interventions, but rather prevention of weight gain. Whereas more intensive interventions would be considered with increasing stage, and then at stage 4, if the person is suitable for intensive intervention, it should be considered, or they may be considered, depending on what you consider their overall prognosis to be, it may be too late for intensive intervention. So I've got some examples here of people. So feel free to type in and say what you think the stage is. But so a 24-year-old woman with a BMI of 32, physically active, no functional limitations, normal blood pressure, normal glucose, no mental health issues. So there's a few answers coming through. So this person actually has, so she's got class 1 obesity because her BMI is between 30 and 35, but in terms of the staging system, she has stage 0 obesity because she has no no comorbidities, no complications, no preclinical high blood pressure or glucose, no issues at all related to the obesity. So she may not need weight loss intervention at this stage. She may actually just need identification of factors that are contributing to weight gain and prevention of further weight gain. Second person is a 32-year-old man with a BMI of 36. He has hypertension, obstructive sleep apnea, and depression. And yes, there's some answers coming through. So this person has class 2 obesity because the BMI is between 35 and 40, but he also has stage 2 obesity because he has clearly complications of the obesity with the hypertension and the sleep apnea and depression, and he would clearly benefit from weight loss intervention. The third person is a 45-year-old woman with a BMI of 54 who's largely wheelchair bound because of arthritis. So this person has stage 4 obesity because they have a severe functional limitation with wheelchair. Whereas if the same person with the BMI of 54 was pretty ambulant, only had mild joint pain, for example, they would still have the same class but a much lower stage of obesity. So to summarize this section, BMI is a useful measure of health risks across populations, but not for individuals. And the Edmonton Obesity Staging System provides a framework for staging the obesity according to severity of complications and can predict mortality better than BMI alone. It can be used to guide management decisions. I think, yeah, that's the end of this section. I don't think there are any particular questions that we need to... Are there any particular questions that anyone wants to ask specifically related to this before I move on to the body weight regulation section? Otherwise, there'll be time for questions at the end as well. All right, good. I'm going to move on. So, we're moving on to regulation of body weight. So even if you didn't know anything about this, the science of body weight regulation, you would intuitively know that that there is a force beyond our conscious control that determines what our body shape and size tends to be. It is not the case that all thin people only eat vegetables and live virtuous lives, and people with obesity eat junk food and sit around all day. We know that that's not the case. We all know people who eat whatever they want, never put on any weight, and people who have severe obesity but that are constantly very attentive to what they're eating, try and eat healthily, exercise regularly, and still have difficulty managing their weight. So what is going on here? Well, the first point I want to make is that weight is largely genetically determined. So this has been shown, the nicest illustrations of this, I think, come from a series of studies that were done in the late 1980s that were adoption and twin studies. So this study is from Denmark, where the investigators looked at 540 adoptees in Denmark who, across all the spectrum of weight from lean to obese, and then they looked at the weight of their biological parents and their adopted parents. And what they found was that there was a strong relation between the weight class of the adoptees and the body mass index of their biological parents. and no relation between the weight class of the adoptees and the body mass index of their adopted parents. And this was not just among people with obesity, but present across the whole range of BMI. And they concluded that genetic influences were important in determining weight in adults, whereas the environment alone was not apparently relevant. A second study around the same time by the same authors looked again at adoptees where there were pairs of twins, and one of the twins had been adopted out and one of the twins stayed with the biological family. And what they found was that comparing the twins, monozygotic and dizygotic twins, if they were reared together, there was, as you would expect, a stronger correlation between the weight of the monozygotic or identical twins, and still a correlation between the weight or the BMI of the dizygotic twins. But if they were reared apart, the correlation was really not significantly different. So whether they were raised together in the same household or raised completely separately, their body weights were equally similar. The last study also showed not just what the correlation between twins' actual weight was, but also what their response to overfeeding was. So in this particular study, they took 12 pairs of lean, healthy male twins and overfed them by 1,000 calories a day for 100 days. And what they found was that they all put on weight, but there was a large range of weight that they put on. So the two notable findings of this study were that, firstly, even though the average weight gain over that time was around 8 kilos, there was a range from 4 to 13 kilos. Some people put on more weight than others. But within each twin pair, the response of the pairs of twins to overfeeding was very similar. So each twin put on much the same amount of weight. So these studies do show that genes are very important in what our body weight tends to be and how we tend to respond to various environmental stimuli, particularly overfeeding. So the next point is that where does this happen? This happens largely in the brain. So this figure shows, there's no way of pointing. Is there a way of pointing? No. So there is an area in the hypothalamus called the arcuate nucleus, where there are two interconnected groups of neurons with opposing effects on appetite and energy expenditure. So there are neurons containing neuropeptide Y and AGRP, which are involved in hunger, and neurons containing POMC, which are involved in inhibiting feeding. And so the balance of the output from this area tends to influence how likely we are to feel like eating or to stop eating. And what determines the balance of output from this area is input from the periphery. So there are a whole lot of hormones that are produced in the gut, the stomach, the pancreas, and the fat. On a meal-to-meal basis, so things like PYY, ghrelin, which makes us hungry, PYY, cholecystokinin, GLP-1, which are satiety hormones, and they are released in response to meals, or suppressed in response to meals in the case of ghrelin, which sends information to the hypothalamus about what we're eating at the time. So incoming nutrients. And then there are these longer term signals of energy, so insulin and leptin in particular, which is from adipose tissue. And these give rather than a meal-to-meal indication of nutrients, this gives a more longer term view of what our energy stores are. So all of this information gets sent to the hypothalamus, where it's integrated and then determines the balance of how inclined we are to feel like eating or not. So leptin is the key hormone here. It's produced in fat cells in relation to cell size, and it inhibits the NPY and AGRP neurons, so it acts to inhibit fitting. So the importance of leptin is just highlighted by a couple of examples. So one is the OB mouse, which is a mouse that is deficient in leptin. So that's the large mouse on the right. So this mouse, without any functional leptin, becomes very hyperphagic and very obese. And in humans, there is a mutation that causes leptin deficiency, which also causes, from early childhood, severe hyperphagia, severe obesity. So this illustration is of a child who weighed 42 kilos at 3 years old, who was leptin deficient, and when it was discovered and he was treated with leptin, this is him 4 years later at the age of 7, weighing less than he did at the age of 3, with normalization of his appetite. So I use these as examples to highlight the importance of leptin, but actually most people with obesity do not have leptin deficiency. Leptin deficiency is a very, very rare cause of obesity. Most people with obesity actually have high leptin in relation to their high adipose mass, because it's produced in adipocytes in relation to the amount of fat that's there. Leptin deficiency or reduction in leptin is important as a signal of energy deficiency that results in increased appetite. So we'll talk about that a bit later. So the next point to make is that weight is homeostatically regulated. So this means that physiological processes are adjusted to maintain equilibrium. It's not just our own personal conscious efforts that are determining our weight, our appetite, our energy expenditure. So this slide I've split up into several parts, but it's basically a slide that is from a study of rats, but there is a type of laboratory rat that is used as a model for, thought to be a reasonably good model for human obesity, because it's mixed genetic background. If you put them on a very high fat, high sugar, high energy, palatable diet, about half of them develop obesity, and some of them remain resistant to obesity. So in this study, they took these rats, put them on a high energy diet for 4 weeks, and then they separated out the ones that became the most obese and the ones that stayed lean. The ones in the middle, they kept on a healthy diet for the remainder of their lives in the study. So you can see that rats, unlike humans, actually continue to put on weight throughout their whole lives. They don't stop putting on weight as adults. And then the rats that gained a lot of weight or appeared to be resistant to obesity, they continued on the high-fat diet, not the healthy diet. So they gave them as much of the high-fat diet as they wanted, and you can see that the ones in the purple diamonds put on a lot of weight. They then, after 14 weeks, switched them to the healthy diet. So on the healthy diet, their weight stabilized a little bit. So they maintained their trajectories, really. The fatter ones stayed heavy and the leaner ones stayed lean. And then they took half of the ones in each of those groups and restricted their food intake. And then they allowed them to eat as much as they wanted of the healthy diet. So what you can see here really is that even though they were eating the healthy diet, they all put on weight right back up to where they were before they were food restricted. So what this tells us two things really. So one is that in genetically susceptible animals, once they have eaten the high energy diet, some of them become obese, and then even after they change to a healthy diet, that obesity is defended. They can't just normalize their weight despite eating the healthy diet. So is there a human equivalent to this? I think we do recognize this pattern in people that we see. So this is really a slide taken from a meta-analysis of studies which looked at the average weight loss maintained after completion of a structured weight loss program. So people lost weight successfully at the beginning in the first year, on average 10 kilos, but over the next 2 to 5 years, most people put on most of the weight that they initially lost. So why does this happen? It's not just because people lose motivation or they can't be bothered following the diet anymore. Once people have lost weight, almost invariably, they're very determined not to put the weight back on. They don't want to go back to how they were before, yet so many of them do. That takes us to what actually happens in the body when we lose weight. So one of the things that happen is that leptin plummets. So this slide looks at, in the black line is just the BMI, so people who went on a weight loss diet and lost about 15% of their starting weight, their leptin levels drop profoundly out of proportion to the amount of weight that they lost. And this drop in leptin was sustained. So if you remember what happens with the leptin deficient mice and the leptin deficient child, this is actually, even though people with obesity start with a much higher leptin than like high levels of circulating leptin, they fall very quickly the minute we start restricting our food intake or losing weight. Second change is the change in ghrelin. So ghrelin is the hormone from the stomach which makes us hungry. It's one of the only of the peripheral hormones that increases hunger. And this study shows in the blue line, you can see the normal diurnal variation of ghrelin. So it goes up before meals, we get hungry, we eat. When we eat, the ghrelin falls. So we're not hungry for a while, and then it rises up again before the next meal. So in the red dots is what happens after people lost weight. The diurnal variation was preserved, but at all times, their ghrelin was much higher than it had been before they lost weight. So we did a study in our research group where we looked at these two hormones plus a bunch of other hormones, because until then we hadn't known what happens to some of the other hormones, but also whether the changes just happen during the active weight loss period and what will happen when people stop dieting. So we put people on a very low energy diet so that they lost about 14% of their starting weight over 10 weeks. And then they were reintroduced to normal food and ate normal food for the subsequent 12 months, trying to keep their weight off, but as you can see from this slide, gradually increasing. They regained about 5 kilos from their nadir weight. So just to orientate you to these figures, it's the hormone ghrelin in the top left, which is the one that makes us hungry, PYY, amylin, and CCK, which all are satiety hormones. And across the x-axis is postprandial time. So this was done fasting and after a standardized meal test. So you can see that after the meal, the ghrelin drops and then rises up again at the time of the next meal, whereas the other three hormones are released in response to the meal and then drop. by the time of the next film. So this is what they were like before weight loss. And then after weight loss, immediately after the weight loss period, the ghrelin went up, as we saw from the previous studies. So that's the hormone that tends to make us hungrier. All of the other hormones which tend to make us full dropped. And 1 year later, even though they were already putting on weight, their hormone levels had not gone back to normal. In some cases, they hadn't changed at all from the 10 weeks. And this is a similar figure, but actually when we asked people to rate on questionnaires how hungry they were. How hungry are you? How much do you want to eat? And at all times, at 10 weeks and also 1 year later after they'd lost weight, people were hungrier, they wanted to eat more, and that didn't go away after 1 year of maintaining the lower weight or even putting back on some of the weight that they lost. So in summary, we have a lot of hormones, most of which are involved in reducing our appetite, and most of which change after weight loss in a direction which we would expect would encourage us to feel hungrier and eat more. And when you ask people how hungry they actually are hungrier after they've lost weight, and that doesn't tend to go away, even at least 1 year after weight loss. So that particular study looked at 1 year. We've subsequently done a study looking at leptin and ghrelin 3 years after weight loss, and still the changes are persistent. And people have also looked at energy expenditure. So it's not just these hormones that change after weight loss, but the defense of body weight also involves changes in energy expenditure. So this figure is from a study where people with obesity and lean controls on the right, they looked at their energy intake requirements to maintain their weight. So what you can see, it's corrected for body surface area. So what you can see here is that actually the energy requirements, when you correct it for body surface area, aren't very different between people with obesity and controls. But after they lost 10% of their starting weight, the energy requirements dropped profoundly, such that the people with obesity that had lost weight had lower absolute energy expenditure than the lean controls, even though they were 60% heavier. So the energy expenditure drops lower than what you would expect just for the reduced body mass and composition. But despite the lower energy expenditure, they aren't reducing their food intake, they're actually hungrier. And the reduced energy expenditure is not due to conscious physical activity, it's actually due to muscle efficiency at low workloads. And the response is similar in people with obesity and lean people. And again, this change is persistent and long-standing. So you may have seen this study from 2016 about the people in the American Biggest Loser competition, where they did a 6-year follow-up. And so the people in the competition, during the competition, lost weight with dieting and a lot of exercise. And they ended up losing, over the 30 weeks of the competition, they lost, on average, 60 kilograms. And when they were followed up 6 years later, they had regained about 40 of those kilograms on average. So they were still 20 kilos below where they started. And this panel shows what they've called the metabolic adaptation. So this is their reduction in energy expenditure beyond what would be predicted for their body weight and composition. So you can see that at the end of the study, when they'd lost weight, they were burning on average 300 calories per day lower than what would be expected for a person with a comparable body weight and composition who hadn't lost that weight. And then 6 years later, even though they had regained 2/3 of the weight that they lost, the gap between what the expected and the actual measured energy expenditure hadn't decreased. It was in fact more. So people are burning 300 to 500 kilocalories less per day than they expect. So in summary, to summarize this section, the body weight is predominantly determined by our genetic background. It's homeostatically regulated. And when we lose weight, there is a multifaceted, long-lasting adaptations that occur that involving hormones, appetite, energy expenditure. And so these changes are all largely in a direction which will facilitate regain of the lost weight. So this partly explains why it's so common to lose weight. It's not because people want to go back to their old ways or their eating habits, or it's really that in order to keep the weight off, people have to fight against their biological processes and continue to do that indefinitely, essentially, in order to keep the weight off when people around them are eating and drinking normally, exercising when they feel like it, not exercising when they feel like it. These people have to be super strict, restricting their food intake, exercising all the time indefinitely in order to keep the weight off. So it's very, very, very hard. And so things that we can do to help them, like controlling their appetite, if necessary, with pharmacotherapy and surgery, are justifiable, because maintaining the weight is really, really hard to do.
Great, thanks, Priya. Well, before I move on to my section, we've got some really interesting questions here. I'll read out some of the questions that have come up. So, Priya, one of the webinar participants has asked, so early obesity sets up people for long life obesity. Is this because adipose tissue is biologically active tissue, like endocrine tissue, or is this some epigenetic effect that is imprinted in early life?
That's a good question. We don't really understand why this happens. We think that there is some epigenetic effect that predisposes people to then get on this trajectory of obesity. So it's likely to be an epigenetic effect.
That's really, really interesting. We've got some other interesting questions here. How long after the weight loss were the low levels of leptin and the high levels of ghrelin maintained? Did it change over time, or did it remain steady?
So the low level of leptin and the high levels of ghrelin, in our study, it was maintained for 1 year. Other people have studied it, well, in our research group, have studied it out to 3 years, and it's still maintained. Nobody has looked beyond 3 years, but we do think that this is an indefinite process because, for example, if you look at people who've had lap bands or bariatric surgery done, and then 10 years later or 15 years later they get a complication and they need the surgery reversed, the minute it's reversed, those people start putting on weight again. So that is likely to be because the control on their appetite from the surgery has been removed, and then these hormone changes which are active are driving them to be hungry, and they're putting the weight back on. So it's only been measured out to 3 years, but we know from, we can infer, I guess, from experience and from what happens to people longer term that it's indefinite.
We've also got another question here. How does ghrelin correspond to insulin levels? Is it inverse?
I don't think we've actually looked at the correlation between ghrelin and insulin. I mean, they would have opposite sort of, physiological roles. So we would,
We've got a final question here. I'm not sure if we're able to answer this. We've got an interesting question about intermediate fasting. The comment here was, as far as I have read, this is not happening with repeat intermittent fasting. I believe this question was regarding the hormonal changes that were occurring.
Intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting?
I think she means intermittent fasting, but it's been written as intermediate.
I think it is meant intermittent fasting. Well, look, there are ongoing studies looking at that. So there aren't any published data looking at these hormones with intermittent fasting. But I know there are active studies going on that are looking at that, because it is thought that, can you, by giving the body a break where you're really maintaining the weight rather than continuously restricting, does it make a difference? We don't know the answer yet. My feeling would be that the changes are actually related to the degree of weight loss, and so I would expect that they will be the same with intermittent fasting, but we don't know.
Well, I think that's all the questions so far, so feel free to ask more questions as the webinar goes on. I'm going to move on to more the pharmacotherapy management in obesity. So I guess with what you've heard from Priya, it certainly is hard to not so much lose weight, but to actually maintain weight. So some of the tools that she mentioned in a summary was using medications and surgery. So I hope by the end of this section, I can actually give you some confidence in prescribing some of these medications. Some of these medications have been around for years, and others have been only around for a small amount of time. But I think if we can get to know them well, to use them, be familiar with them, they won't be seen as daunting. My first slide is quite a famous meta-analysis done by a man called Franz, who looked at all the studies looking at non-surgical weight loss therapies. The interesting thing here is that, as you can see, simple therapies such as exercise, diet plus exercise, and diet alone don't actually produce a good amount of weight loss. And interestingly enough, as Priya spoke about, you can see at most of the time, after 12 months, most of that weight was regained. One thing I find really interesting is the one at the top, the advice alone. Virtually over 4 years, there really isn't any weight loss. The blue line here always catches my eye. This is very low calorie diets, which, as you can see, do actually work. But once again, emphasising what Priya said about the significant weight regain that you get over this time. So the couple that seem to be sort of flat, we've got sibutramine, as we know, I think it was called Reductil back in the day that it was allowed to be prescribed. So there isn't actually a significant amount of weight regain. And similarly enough with orlistat on the purple line here. This is quite an old study, and we've got newer medications out, but you can certainly see the benefit of medications and certainly getting a better weight loss and also helping with weight regain. Georgia brought this slide up last time. She mentioned, talking about goals with patients and what their expectations are. And we can actually see that we don't actually need a large amount of weight loss to improve someone metabolically or their medical conditions. Usually, unfortunately, their expectations of how much they want to lose are usually different to, I guess, what we hope for our patients. But they are often surprised with how little the weight loss you need to actually produce some metabolic benefits. For example, the first one, you can see with diabetes, already by losing 5%, you're already improving your diabetes. Same with your hypertension, your lipids, and some of your other diseases. I guess the key point is medications can actually get you there. With the first graph we saw, diet, exercise, and advice alone may not get you a 5 to 10%, but medication actually can get you there and can also hold you there. But unfortunately, when we see people weight regain, some of these metabolic conditions actually reverse. What I'm going to do now is a quick poll. I just want to have a gauge of people's familiarity and confidence with using some of these medications. So So we're going to put a poll up and we'll get you to answer them.
Okay. Whoops.
Great, so it's interesting to see that, as expected, most of you have tried phentermine, and I'm actually really surprised that a lot of you have tried Orlistat. I'm very pleased to see that there has been some topiramate use and a bit of liraglutide as well, and even a 4% of the combination.
I'm surprised by that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really, really encouraging. Orlistat, I'm very surprised about. So I'm going to do now another poll just to gauge your confidence in that. Okay, great. So I'm presuming that all of you can see these results. Yeah, okay, good. So obviously in this talk, I want to focus on the medications that you are not so confident in. So I can see that you're very confident in things like phentermine, reasonably confident in Orlistat, not so confident in topiramate and liraglutide, which are, I guess, some of the newer drugs. So I will talk about all four of these drugs because these drugs are the only medications available in Australia for obesity at the moment, but I will go quicker through the first two, and I'll spend a bit more time on liraglutide and topiramate, and also a little bit about the combination as well. So Orlistat, as I said, I'll go through this quickly. Orlistat is a lipase inhibitor. Its role is to block lipase, and lipase works in the intestine at breaking down fat. I mean, I'm looking at this picture here, and I'm just thinking of Pac-Man. So it looks like Orlistat sort of is stopping the Pac-Man monster from actually attacking the fat. Does Orlistat work? And as we saw before, a great deal of you actually use it, and a great deal have confidence in it. So this study by Tongerson actually shows that it is clinically significant compared to placebo. It appears that over a time frame of 208 weeks, that Orlistat is significantly different to producing weight loss than placebo. But one thing I wanted to note here is, as you can see, as Priya spoke about, there is actually significant weight regain with both placebo and with Orlistat. So in a sense, Orlistat seems to be very good at producing good weight loss at the 1 year mark, but almost by 208 weeks, a lot of that weight has been weight regain. So that to me makes me think, well, is it good enough to better hold someone's weight for weight maintenance? To be honest, I'm actually surprised that a lot of you have tried it. I work in obesity, and I don't think I've ever really used it. So if most of you are familiar with it, as you know, you give it 3 times a day. It mainly works on intestinal lumen. Obviously, the side effects, as we saw with the Pac-Man, it is not allowing the fat to be broken down. So you are going to get fecal incontinence and fatty and oily stools. You also may have some vitamin malabsorption. There are some rare effects: severe liver injury, potential risk of kidney injury and pancreatitis, and you cannot use it in pregnancy. Now, most of us don't need to give a script for it, so patients are able to access this drug, and there are certainly social implications. I mean, there's not a very nice picture you can see there of a man. I remember when I worked in the city, in Melbourne City, I had a lot of businessmen who came to me and said they were actually taking Orlistat that they could get over the counter, but they were actually wearing nappies for their business lunches. So look, certainly got some social implications. for my lot of patients that I see, so I mainly work in mental health, it is not a centrally acting medication, so it will not help with hunger, which is why I suspect why it hasn't been good with weight regain. Because as Priya explained before, when you lose weight, there are hormones you have to fight, which make you more hungry. So it hasn't been able to actually act on the weight regain. Now, phentermine, I think this is a drug that most of you were familiar with and most of you had actually used. It's a centrally acting sympathomimetic anorectic agent. Wow, that was a bit of a mouthful, wasn't it? And so we know that it acts on the hypothalamus with increasing noradrenaline. And this sympathetic response tends to cause lowered hunger and causes people not to be as needing food as much. Once again, it does work. It has a very similar graph to Orlistat, in fact, probably a slightly better one. But I think there's some really interesting things about this particular study. So they were all given 1,000-calorie diet a day. The green graph shows placebo. So even without Duramine, people lost a good 4.5 kilograms. With Duramine, they doubled that almost at 9.2. But the really interesting thing is when you did what we call post-therapy or broken therapy, where people were given Duramine for 4 weeks, alternating with placebo for 4 weeks again, and staying on that 1,000-calorie diet, they actually got a similar result to being on Duramine. So I guess it tells you that you don't necessarily need to be on it all the time, and that it does work when we do this sort of post-therapy. Now, I wonder, did most of you know that sort of thing? I guess you can, either you want to type your answers in or you didn't have to, but certainly I thought that was really interesting. Now, is it tolerated? I think the major problem with phentermine is it's whether it can be tolerated. As we know, it's given in 15 milligrams, 30 milligrams, and 40 milligram doses, and it is recommended for 12 weeks with a review of further use. Probably the most question I get asked at the time is, can it be used more for 12 weeks? I think the main thing is you really do need to look out for your cardiovascular and central nervous system effects. So obviously cardiovascular side effects are your hypertension, tachycardia, and your central nervous system problems are the insomnia, restlessness, mood changes. If these side effects are being monitored and were controlled, there is no reason why another further 12 weeks can be given with a review on the end of it. In fact, I spoke to a GP only yesterday who said that they'd had someone on Duramine, 50 milligrams, for 10 years continuously, and they had not come off it. She had experienced no side effects of any sort, and it was not only did it cause initial weight loss, but it was holding her weight really well. So I guess the take-home message is that you can use it continuously, or you can choose to give it a break. We actually saw with the previous slide that actually alternating with 4 weeks coming off produced a similar result. So you can certainly do that. But you must look out for some of the severe hypertension, cardiovascular disease risk, and probably the most important thing is the CNS disturbances. The number of times patients will come back saying to me that, they've lost their wife or they've lost their husband or their job or their kids have divorced them, all sorts of things when they've been on a course of phentermine. So you've got to be careful at monitoring it. Certainly in my population, in the mental health population, it's very hard for me to use it. Most of the side effects make my patients, unfortunately, a lot worse. They can get psychotic, agitated. And there is a small serotonergic effect on SSRIs and MAO inhibitors as well. So I probably would say you need to avoid it in the mental health population unless the patient has come in and said they've used it before and with minimal side effects. There are some questions that people ask about phentermine which commonly get asked a lot of the time. The real worry is about addictive potential. But really there's minimal effects on dopamine and serotonin. I don't actually believe there is a real addictive problem. If it was, we don't really see it being sold on the black market or sold on the streets. So I think the main issue is not that it's addictive. I don't think you should not prescribe to your patients who are worried they're going to be addicted, but I think you just need to be more aware of the side effects that could actually occur. So we spoke about post-therapy before, and we spoke about just watching out for the cardiovascular and mental health issues. Interestingly enough, if you lose weight, your hypertension gets better, so it is a bit of a catch-22 situation. Lorectide. Now, from the poll, I think most of you had heard of it and had tried it before, but a lot of you were not confident in using it. I think from memory, I think it was about 18% or something like that. Yep. So, look, I'm gonna pledge my allegiance to Lorectide. I do like it. I do use it a lot. As you know, it's a glucagon-like peptide 1 agonist. So Priya spoke about the GLP-1 being a satiety hormone. So basically, this drug mimics it. So it works in 3 different ways. It works in the brain by causing satiety to be improved. It works in the pancreas, and this is where it has its diabetic benefits. So it improves insulin, and it reduces glucagon, and also it works in GI tract. So it reduces gastric emptying, and so basically slows food down. Now, unfortunately, because of this benefit of slowing food down, which gives a sense of fullness, this is where patients will actually experience their gastrointestinal side effects, which we'll talk about next, after this slide. Once again, the medications that we've seen so far have all been significantly proven to be better than placebo. This one actually shows normal glycemia in the compared to pre-diabetes, and we can actually see that they show very, very similar results. I get asked a lot of questions on, can we use it in non-diabetics? And people who are using it, who aren't diabetics, say, look, would it make me get diabetes? They are unusual questions, but I'm sure they're questions that you probably get asked in your practice as well. But as you can see, compared to placebo, Lorectide at 3.0 milligrams produces a 9.2% weight loss compared to 3.2. So look, it certainly does work. Now, I guess there's a lot of concerns and about using it because, as Priya found for me, there was about 80% of people who were confident in using it. I'm suspecting it's a lot around the side effects, and certainly I think I'll focus a bit of time on there. So as we know, it's a self-administered daily injection. I think that it should be considered in anyone with poorly controlled diabetes, insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, PCOS, or family history of diabetes. So we have 4 drugs that we can use. I think anyone with that sort of risk factor, those sort of history, should be considered for this drug. Now, I think the main fear about this drug is the side effects. And we know that because of the way it affects on the GI tract in slowing down gastric emptying, that it does cause nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Initially, when I started prescribing this, I would tell patients that it does get better. It does get better over time, but now I just prescribe an antiemetic. So I think you almost, if you're worried or have a chat with patient, if they're worried about nausea, if they are nauseous sort of type of patients, or if they took metformin before and they did get those GI side effects, I would have no hesitation in at the same time giving them an antiemetic. I use a lot of Zofran, or Ondansetron, sorry, and I use a bit of Stemetil. So I find they both work really well, and they certainly help patients in the initial staging. Now, to constipation, this is a real problem as well, and there's no doubt that constipation can stop people from staying on this drug. And often I will have the conversation with the patient. I would ask them, is the constipation enough for you to put up to stay on this drug? And I would say 8 times out of 10, the drug is working so well that they're happy to stay on the drug because of the constipation. However, it can be really unpleasant. People can go from going to the toilet, once a day to 4 to 5 days, and that you can feel really, really uncomfortable. I found in my experience that unfortunately reducing the dose doesn't really improve it. So if someone gets constipation on a 3.0 milligram dose, dropping down to 2.4 doesn't really improve it. Dropping down to 1.8 somewhat gets a little bit better, but it's only really dropping to about a 1.2 that it really does improve. That's certainly my observation, and hopefully some of your patients have had better results. But certainly I find it doesn't seem to improve with a drop in dose unless it's a significant drop. What I do find really works is putting them on cloxamine. I know it sounds like we are now adding more medications in, but as I said, I do have the conversation with the patient. If this drug is working for you, do you want to be on this drug? And if they say yes, then we try and work with the constipation. The other thing that I work with quite a few gastroenterologists, they say using brown rice. Brown rice is a really good bulking agent, so adding brown rice in to the evening meal, maybe once every second day, seems to push things along quite well. And as you know, brown rice is low GI, so shouldn't have any real impacts on their weight as well. So there's sort of some tips you can try. Now, the fatigue is really common side effect. I think maybe 1 in 4 of my females seem to get it. My males don't seem to get it. The description of the fatigue is like they want to have a sleep in the afternoon, and almost like they want to put their head down on the computer. Now, I believe there's an Australian Facebook Lorectitide page. I certainly don't dare go on it. I'm not sure what I'll find on there, but my patients tell me there's a lot of talk about using Berocca and vitamin B, and it seems to really improve it. So certainly when my patients get fatigue, I do talk about, perhaps the benefits of trying perhaps some Berocca or vitamin B. Look, there's no clear evidence on it, but I don't think these sort of things would harm. And I would say, certainly in my patients, 50% of people have certainly described the fatigue to get better. The other way you can improve the fatigue is to drop the dose. This one actually does improve with a dropping of dose as opposed to constipation. So I think if you can get them to drop a dose down, certainly the fatigue does improve. The other thing is most of my patients, when you get to 3 months, the fatigue actually does get better over that time. Now, the other common side effect is rashes. This is actually more common than you think it is. And when they get the rashes, they're really big welts. Sometimes my email inbox is bombarded with, big disclosed stomachs with big red blotchy rashes on them, and they can look really quite hideous. They're perfectly innocent. They seem to be related to more so a drug, a needle site sort of response, not so much the drug itself, but the needle the reaction to the needle to the skin. Unfortunately, there's no way around this. An antihistamine is probably the only way that's going to work, and they will have to take it daily. Usually 180 milligrams of Telfast should be enough. Sometimes they might have to take a Polaramid at night time. So in summary, look at the main side effects. As I said, we saw that the confidence levels of prescribing Lorectitide was about 18%, that most of you in the poll. If it is around the side effects, I think, unfortunately, we may have to use medication to counteract it. And I think it's important to have a conversation with the patient. Are you willing to stay on this drug? Is this drug working for you? Do you want to stay on it a little bit longer? Do you want to try whether we can get around it by trying some antihistamines or maybe some B12, or trying some coloxamine senna, also antiemetics. Also, with the fatigue, ensure they're eating properly. As you know, when Lorectitide works, they really are not hungry. They need to be eating quality food. Certainly, some of my older patients, they think they can get away with having, 1 meal in the day of cheese and crackers. If they're eating that, of course, they're going to be fatigued. So it's really, really important that they have good quality, nutrient-dense food that gives them the energy to be able to keep moving on. Now, your less common side effects, but certainly more serious, are your hypoglycemia, your pancreatitis, your gallbladder disease, and your renal impairment. There's also effects to mood and suicidal thoughts. Drug interactions, there really isn't that many. You just got to be careful with insulin use. I've certainly got some patients who are taking insulin and Lorectitide at the same time, and it might mean you do have to drop the insulin doses. It is not allowed to be used at people with severe renal and liver insufficiency, and pregnancy again. So we've seen the first 2 drugs. Pregnancy is unfortunately contraindicated. The big one really is the pancreatitis and the pancreatic cancer. So you really need to be looking out for both of those sort of things. I have highlighted in red the mood changes, the suicidal thoughts, the major depression, and psychiatric illness. But I really believe that this is, in some sense, misunderstood. We can see that that in the study, in the Journal of Medicine study, it showed that 6 out of 3,384 people, which equals to a 0.2%, reported suicidal ideation. The problem with the study also was they excluded people with major depression, and that is why it states that the efficacy of staging in psychiatric patients is not yet been demonstrated in the patient information. I am a big believer of this drug in the mental health population, and I know that it is written that it is not safe yet, or has not been demonstrated. As we know, people with mental illness unfortunately have a great disposition to metabolic syndrome, to weight gain, and they really don't have a lot of options. The little picture at the bottom is, they are hungry. These drugs make them hungry, and this particular drug seems to be very good at stopping the hunger and improving insulin resistance. So if some of you are feeling ill-confident about using this drug because of your fear of the risk in mental illness, I encourage you just to try on a few of your patients. If you're worried about their mental state, maybe some of your patients who are fully working in the community and are on antidepressants, and try it out on them. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to find that some of the mental health effects aren't as worrying as first thought. I guess the most important thing is you need to be working with a psychiatrist. You need to tell them that you're starting this medication, and you probably will need to be monitoring, weekly at least for the first month. I have probably about 250 patients on liraglutide with mental illness, and I certainly feel confident that with good collaboration with the psychiatrist and monitoring each week, that this is something that can be used in this population and can be used really well. Topiramate. Now, topiramate's a really interesting drug. Look at this wonderful graph here. There is really hardly any weight regain over time from this study. So this is over 6 months and using sort of different types of doses. You can see that you don't really have that classic Nike tick sign of the weight regain. The mechanism of action is very unclear. I've tried to understand how topiramate works. I've read things from that it works on the reward center in the brain, that it alters the way that reward and food is processed. I've also read that it reduces, it works on the addiction center, reducing the need for addiction. I've also read that it has influence on leptin and cortisol, and also it impacts on insulin, making ketosis a lot easier, so fat is burned. But none of these theories have been proven. Now, Priya, do you have any understanding of how topiramate works?
No, I don't think it's clearly understood. I've read it's something to do with GABA, or it's some central effect, but that it is not clear how it works.
Okay, yeah. So I certainly haven't found any clear mechanism, but look, it does work, and perhaps I think it was 4%. Was it 4% that were confident in using it, or it was certainly
less than 10%?
Oh, was it less than 10%?
Yeah,
okay.
I can't remember what
so I think 4% was a combination of that one. Yeah. But I mean, it was certainly a really low percentage, and I'm guessing the reason why it is not used is because we don't really know why it works, and probably because it is off-label. So it is listed as one of the drugs we can use for obesity, but it is one of the off-label drugs. And often I do prescribe it, and the patients are told that the pharmacists have called it a dirty drug. So it does have a little bit of I wouldn't say a bad reputation. It's just a bit of an unknown way that it works. But having said that, it is very cheap and accessible. Now, if the reason why most of you are not confident in using it is the dosing schedule. So the key is you've got to start low and you go slow. So I would start with a 12.5 milligram tablet. Sorry, that's half. It comes in 25, so you're looking at half of a 25 milligram tablet. That's 12.5 milligrams. I would use that for 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the size of the person. If they're very small, I'd keep them on 12.5 milligrams for 2 weeks. If they're a medium-sized person, I'd shift them up in 1 week. And then you'd go up by 25 milligrams every 2 weeks until you get to 100. Now, you don't have to get to 100. Certainly, I've got good response at 50 milligrams or 75 milligrams, but the key point is you've got to build the dose up slowly, and you've got to monitor their side effects. Now, the side effects, now this drug is what I would call a brain drug. Liraglutide is a gut drug. Predominantly the side effects come from the gut, but with topiramate, most of the side effects come from the brain, mainly because we use it in Australia for epilepsy and we use it for migraines. So the common side effects that I see are paresthesia and pins and needles. I would say 100% of my patients get this side effect. It's a really, really odd side effect. And it might be something like tingling in the tips of their fingers or tingling in their toes, but it's fleeting. It goes for about 30 seconds, and it goes, but it's considered quite innocent. Probably the more common side effects that worries people is the brain fog, or what I call cognitive dulling. So I'm not quite sure what drop in fatigue means. I think I meant to say just a level of fatigue, and also sleeplessness. Probably the one to note is the lowered mood. And certainly I see a lot of that. I do work in a mental health population, and I do find that quite a few of our patients will have a lowered mood. It certainly doesn't happen to everybody, and it tends to happen at the higher doses. Some of the rarer side effects are the myopia and the glaucoma, and it's contraindicated in glaucoma, retinal and pregnancy. So that's 4 out of 4 now. None of these medications can be used in pregnancy. So I guess I guess that we probably shouldn't be looking at losing weight in pregnancy anyway. But the things that the drug interactions, there's quite a few minor ones, but the ones we need to look out for are interactions with other anticonvulsants and also with some other mood stabilizers. So with sildenafil, there is a low chance of serotonin syndrome, and also it interacts with lithium, increasing lithium toxicity. So I routinely use it with lithium. It just means that I do measure lithium doses more carefully, and I just drop the dose. So it can certainly be used. In terms of my impression, look, it's a really cheap drug. It's really, really affordable. It can range from $13 to $20 a month. It's a tablet. So a lot of the reasons why people don't want to use liraglutide is that it's expensive, at $387 a month and an injection. But topiramate is cheap and it's a tablet. I think that just like I mentioned with liraglutide, if you've got any sort of insulin resistance or diabetic or family history of diabetes, you should consider using liraglutide. I think if someone comes in with migraines, I think it's a no-brainer to try that first. It does actually work really well for migraines, and I think that you'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. The thing to watch out for, though, it does have a really interesting effect on your mental health, and I can't really predict who's going to get it and who doesn't. I was just telling Priya before this webinar that I've got patients who are really sick from a mental health point of view. They're in hospital having ECT every 4 weeks, but yet on topiramate, they have no impact on their mood whatsoever. And it works really well, and they're losing a lot of weight. On the other hand, I might have someone who might have mild depression, that they're working full-time in the community, and that they get a sudden drop in mood. So you cannot predict it. The people who I think will be affected by this aren't, and the people who do, who are affected by it, are people who I didn't expect at all. So I think you need to give it a go, but you need to watch this drug. You probably would need to collaborate with either their psychiatrist or perhaps another GP at the practice, and bring them back in the first month at least. My experience is when they do get a dramatic drop in mood, it usually happens in the first 3 to 4 weeks, and after that, it really doesn't happen. So it's something to look out for, and as soon as you drop the dose or you take them off, the mood gets better. But I think this is a really good drug to use in terms that it's accessible, it's cheap, and it comes in a tablet form. But really, I'm giving you the worst case scenario. The most common side effects are really the pins and needles and the headaches. Now, hoping from that your confidence in using this this particular medication will improve. And I think pick some of your patients who you feel confident in using it for, and give it a go. Now, this seminar is on why is losing weight so hard. So there are also medications that cause weight gain, and most commonly there's psychotropics, the antidepressants, the antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers. There's also antihistamines, anticonvulsants, steroids, antihypertensives, and the pill. Now, with antihistamines, I think the effect is fleeting and mild. Look, I've experienced this myself. I was in China. I'd flown on an aeroplane, and I had experienced some quite severe nausea, so I bought an over-the-counter antihistamine. And I can tell you, I was really hungry after one tablet. I was at a buffet with my kids, and I was eating off their plates, even though there was a buffet that I could have, got my own plate from. I seriously could not stop eating for 2 hours. So there's no doubt that antihistamines can do it, but look, I don't think we take them too often. I think it's something that is fleeting. The anticonvulsants certainly can cause some weight gain. We've certainly also got patients on steroids who do put on weight, but we don't really have a lot of choice in their scenario because the use of prednisone for some of their chronic conditions is certainly necessary. Antihypertensives, we have more choice. The beta blockers like the older type, like the Tenolo and the Metoprolol, certainly other ones which can cause some weight gain, and the pill. I think as GPs, especially female GPs, we're very good at knowing which pills cause weight gain and which don't. But I'm actually going to focus on the drugs that I think we can make the most difference on. I don't think we have a lot of choice with antihistamines, anticonvulsants, steroids, and some of the antihypertensives. But I really believe as GPs, because we see so much mental health, that we can make a really big difference with our psychotropics. So certainly with the antipsychotics, unfortunately the patients have a significant amount of weight gain, and this has a central effect on the hypothalamus, and the blocking of the 5-HT2C receptor histamine together causes an enhanced appetite. Now, I know most of us don't really prescribe antipsychotics, but I think our role as GPs would be that if we see patients coming back from the hospital or from psychiatrists who are on the ones which are high risk, and as we all know, olanzapine and clozapine are the ones which cause significant weight gain. Now, I don't know how many times I've seen a patient come back from the public system and they've been put on olanzapine and clozapine and they've literally gained 20 or 30 kilograms in 3 to 4 months. Now, I know Georgia last week, she challenged us, and when she was talking about chronic disease plans, and she said that obesity can be used as a chronic disease because it's been present for 6 months. And she challenged us. She said, if any of you have had a patient who's developed obesity in less than 6 months, then write to me. Let's do a paper together. Well, I hate to say this, Georgia, a lot of our patients do, and they are really the patients on olanzapine and clozapine. They will put on weight in less than 6 months, and they will climb several BMI figures. So I know we as GPs, certainly myself, and I work, as you know, almost exclusively in mental health, I don't really change our medications. But I think we can have a really good relationship with our psychiatrists, and if we see patients who are on clozapine and olanzapine and some of the other ones, that we can ask them, can they be shifted to something else? For example, risperidone, look, it's an oldie and a goodie. There isn't really a lot of too much weight gain with it. And quetiapine, I know a lot of patients are on Seroquel, and it does cause quite a bit of weight gain. But really, if we can get patients on some of the newer agents, like lurasidone and brexpiprazole, certainly when patients come off these medications, their weight does drop. Look, there's no doubt that some patients are just too sick and they can't be changed off some of the high-risk ones. But there are developing newer ones on the market which certainly are more weight neutral. Now, where can we make a difference? Now, antidepressants, we prescribe these all the time in general practice. Now, Soretti and Mandelli were a couple of Italian psychiatrists, and they looked at they did a meta-analysis and looked at all the antidepressants on the market, and they found on commencement of antidepressants, there certainly was weight loss, but there's certainly one as you can see up here, which you just wouldn't prescribe. You've got amitriptyline, you've got mirtazapine and nortriptyline straight away cause significant weight gain. Some of these here, as you can see, actually cause some weight loss at the beginning. But over time, once you've got the right doses, most of the antidepressants move to a more neutral state. We do now have agomelatine on the market, which certainly has been quite a good drug. It seems to be very good for depression, not so good for anxiety, which is quite weight neutral. Now, every time I do a talk, I get asked about bupropion. I get asked, why don't we use it more? Because it actually is one of the antidepressants that causes weight loss. Look, bupropion is a good drug. It is actually listed on the Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists first line for depression. So not so good for anxiety, but first line for depression. It's in my experience, and certainly I do use it quite a bit, patients, it's quite an activating antidepressant. So they don't get that numbness or that numbness of feeling. But the biggest barrier is the cost. It's about $170 a month. And in my opinion, if you can shift someone to some of the more medium type ones, which are a lot cheaper, I think that's more of a cost benefit. I mean, $170 a month is close to $2,000 a year, where you could be paying $20 or $30 a month, which is $200 to $300 on some of the more neutral ones. That is just my opinion, but certainly, bupropion certainly is one that causes a mild amount of weight loss, but it's not certainly significant. The ones that you really need to be avoiding are your mirtazapine, your amitriptyline, and paroxetine. I see patients on those medications all the time. Look, I think mirtazapine does have its place. Usually when I see anyone with mirtazapine, I try and take them off straight away. But I think your thin, patient with insomnia, it does work quite well, and it probably can fit in that category. But certainly paroxetine, I know it's an old medication. I know it's very good for anxiety, very good for phobias, but people put on a lot of weight on that. So I think if you can shift people off those medications and more to the neutral ones here, half your battle of preventing weight gain is already there. So I know as GPs, we routinely prescribe antidepressants. So I think if we think a little bit more about what we're prescribing, we can make a job a lot easier. Now, the reason why I bring up this graph is the thing that scares me about patients with mental illness, and the reason why I want you guys out there in general practice to have a go with helping patients with mental illness and their weight, is they will live 20 to 30 years less than the general population. I'm not talking about 5 or 10 years, I'm talking about 20 to 30 years less. And this is because of their 50% rate of developing metabolic syndrome, which then causes them to gain weight and cascade down this metabolic highway. I think our job would be if we can shift people up this highway, and we can do that by helping them with weight loss strategies using anti-obesity medications, and looking at our drug choice, especially our antipsychotic drug choice, we can really shift people up here. I'm not talking about curing people, I'm talking about shifting people up. Just like we talk about anxiety being mild, moderate, and severe, we're not talking about curing anxiety, we're talking about improving their state, improving them to a different level, and hopefully we can also increase their longevity and their lifespan at the same time. I think now we'll move on to some cases. So hopefully with the information that I've given you, we can now choose what anti-obesity medications we would use. So we've got case 1, Gina. She's a 35-year-old female. She's single with no partner. She works full-time as a PA. She's got a weight of 108 kilograms and a BMI of 35. She's bipolar affective disorder. She's on lithium, 400 milligrams twice a day, quetiapine, 100 milligrams. Just at night, desvenlafaxine, she's on a dose of 100 milligrams, type 2 diabetes, metformin BD, and her last HbA1c 10.1. I'm actually going to ask Priya. Priya, what do you think what would you use for this lady?
Well, thanks for putting me on the spot there, Molly. I think, well, 2 issues. So one is...
Actually, can I just check, are we doing the poll yet? So we've got the poll going. All right, before I get Priya to answer, I'm going to put the poll on and see what you guys think, and then we'll get, when the poll is finished, we'll get Priya to see what she wants to do. I was actually going to say that all these cases are actually real cases as well. These are actually, all these 3 cases that we're going to bring are actually real patients of mine. Great. Okay. Well, Priya gets to look at your answers. Well, I guess as an endocrinologist, it'd be interesting to hear what you think. What do you think? What would you prescribe to Gina?
Actually, my answer would be none of the above, because I would think of 2 things. Firstly, I would be asking her psychiatrist if it's necessary that she remain on this particular combination of medication.
What if I say to you that we've done that,
okay,
we've spoken, and this is the best combination that keeps her working in the community as a full-time, as a PA?
Fine. Then I would look at her diabetes and see that her HbA1c is 10.1% and she's just on metformin monotherapy. So I would actually be trying to get Gina onto a GLP-1 analog, but rather than liraglutide, which will be expensive for her, she would be able to get PBS subsidized Byetta, or what's it called, exenatide, once weekly or twice daily, even though it's not as effective for weight loss as liraglutide. It is a lot cheaper and would be indicated for treatment of her diabetes.
Okay, and if that didn't work, what would you do then?
If that didn't work, then I would talk to her about whether she wants to try liraglutide, but if she really didn't have any response to exenatide, then I'm not sure that there would be a lot of value in changing to liraglutide. And then it would be difficult because I wouldn't use phentermine in her because of her psychiatric illness. I wouldn't use Orlistat. I would actually talk to her about referring her for bariatric surgery.
Okay. So I guess the point is there is no one correct answer. In this particular case, I think we can look at what we probably wouldn't prescribe. So we probably wouldn't prescribe Orlistat because we are assuming that a lot of our hunger is based on the lithium and quetiapine and desvenlafaxine, and that's not going to help with that. Phentermine we certainly can't use in a mental health population. Topiramate we'd have to be very careful with. Topiramate increases lithium toxicity, so it is one you could use, but you just have to watch your lithium levels there. I guess if this was my patient and she could afford to go on liraglutide, that's probably the drug I would use. But I guess from the endo point of view, we could probably maximise her diabetes as well at the same time. Having a look just for our own education, how does liraglutide work on patients with psychotropic-associated obesity? Look, it works really well. So you can see that as the HbA1c goes down, which is the red graph here, you also get quite a good weight loss as well. So it's different in patients with psychotropic weight gain. They will not get as good a result as someone not on psychotropics, but in my view, if it at least keeps the patient on the medication and it keeps them compliant to their medication, I think that's a really important goal. So goals for people with mental illness are slightly different in that our aim is compliance and also to try and reduce their metabolic risk at the same time. Case 2, Russell. So this is also another real patient of mine. It's a 45-year-old male living with his girlfriend. He's a partner at a law firm. His weight is 115 kilograms with a BMI of 30. He's got a fatty liver, drinks 10 drinks a week, sleep apnea on a CPAP machine, hypercholesterolemia, 40 milligrams of atorvastatin, and has got bilateral osteoarthritis. So what we'll do now is I'll get you guys to choose what you think you're going to consider for Russell. And I'm not sure if I'll ask Priya again because she went off. She went off. that's okay. But I guess what we're showing is there really is no right answer. But I think this one, I think that this particular one would be quite an interesting one to discuss. Okay, so thank you everyone. So interesting mix here. We've got 61% saying phentermine and 41% saying lorectide, 39% saying topiramate, and 13% saying orlistat. What do you think, Priya? What would you do with this man?
I don't think there is, just based on the information we have, I don't think there is anything that would push me one way or another to use any particular medication. So I would talk to him about the range of options and what the pros and cons and what the side effects were of each. I might base it, do we know if does he have high blood pressure?
His blood pressure is okay.
If his blood pressure is okay, I think all of the options are available to you, so it would be based on his preference and his, and yeah.
Good, yeah, I think this case particularly, and I've been seeing Russell for a year, that was exactly the case. He didn't have any particular reasons to be on any of the 4 agents. I discussed with him a few things. So obviously as a businessman, he didn't really want to be going on orlistat because he did a lot of, I guess, dining and wining of his clients, and wearing a nappy to his business lunches wasn't appealing to him. So we obviously need to go with that option. Now phentermine, look, he didn't have any particular mental illness. I did discuss that option with him. He has sleep apnea. He's a poor sleeper. He mentioned to me he can't afford to have his sleep affected. So phentermine, although would have been a good option in terms of helping his appetite suppression, wasn't suitable for him. So in the end, with him, he decided to go on lorectide, and that has worked very well for him. And I've actually now added a tiny bit of topiramate on top of that as well, just to help with some of his nighttime hunger. So I guess for this particular case, there wasn't any clear answer, but my point is you need to take each patient case by case, discuss the pros and cons with each patient, and they will soon guide you to what the right option actually is. My last case is Kim. So she's a 26-year-old female. She's married. She's a stay-at-home mother of 2. Stay-at-home mother of 2 children under 5. She's got a weight of 79 kilograms. She's got a BMI of 21. She suffers from insomnia, possibly from having poor sleeping young children. I'm sure a lot of you are quite familiar with that. She has migraines once a month, lasting half a day, managed with aspirin and sleep, but they're starting to increase in frequency. Her mother had thyroid cancer, which was managed surgically. So once again, I'll get you all to do your poll, and then I will ask Priya once again to give her option of what she thinks the patient should have. Great, I'm actually really happy with this, because I remember at the beginning of this talk, topiramate was the one drug that most of you had the least confident in prescribing, besides the combination of phentermine, topiramate, well, I guess topiramate in that as well. But now you all, well, not all, but 83% of you have actually chosen this to be the drug that you would use. So Priya, what would you have chosen?
Yeah, I think if we were going to use drugs in this woman, then topiramate would be the one of choice because of her history of migraine.
Yes, absolutely. As I said, if you can kill two birds with one stone, like the first case, I guess the lady had some diabetic issues, Liraglutide would have been a good choice. This lady comes in with migraines. There's other things here. Certainly insomnia, using phentermine would be a bad choice. Her history of thyroid cancer, even though Liraglutide has only been shown to have a rare type of thyroid cancer in medullary thyroid cancer in rodents in the studies, I would have quite a bit of hesitation in prescribing Liraglutide to someone who has anyone with a thyroid cancer risk factor. Look, I guess she could go on Orlistat. She can wear nappies with her children, but look, I think in this case the migraines would make topiramate a good option for her. So talking about topiramate, this particular study looks at it in people with psychiatric disorders. So we harped along before about the risk it has in mood, but certainly it can be a very good drug for psychotropic hunger. So this study looked at people, I believe, with bipolar and showed that 50% of people had a weight loss. The dose to use, which is interesting, is about 70 milligrams. I certainly find that to get a good effective dose, you really need to be going up to a 75 milligram dose. I've certainly got good results on 50, but 75 is about the dose I think you need to at least work your patients up to. This study was done, I believe, in America, and they've gone up to doses of 138.3. In Australia, I certainly don't recommend we go up to more than 100. Look, I do have maybe 10 patients who I've gone on 125 milligrams, but that's because they're on clozapine and olanzapine, and they do actually need that. Interestingly enough, even though it might cause drop of mood, it also has been used as a mood stabilizer, and in some patients, their mood can actually improve. The key point to note is as the dose goes higher, the weight loss actually gets better as well. So from the cases, I think we can conclude that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And I think the key point is you need to work with your patients. You need to know what their needs and what their aims are. And I think to try is the main thing. And what are you going to consider? Affordability. That Priya spoke about some of the other injectables being a lot cheaper. I think affordability is something that obviously comes into people's minds. We can address this by not using the whole dose. And certainly there's no need to go up to 3.0 milligrams on some of our patients. I have some patients on 1.8 milligrams who do really, really well. And so I've even got a couple on 0.6. So I think you don't need to go up. I think you work out with the patient what they can afford. And I did some basic math. So on $387, each increment is about $75 or so. I'll talk about combination therapy down the bottom, and that will also impact on affordability. So patient goals also are important. We saw at the beginning slide that we only need a 5 to 10% weight loss to improve metabolic and medical conditions. So if their goal is that they want to improve their osteoarthritis or they want to reverse their diabetes, then choosing medications that will get them to the 5 to 10% and ones they can tolerate is really important. One really key point: the best predictor of long-term weight loss success is early weight loss. I'm reasonably quick to take people off medications. I would give people, I know it says here they haven't lost more than 5% over 3 months, that you need to stop. That's called the stopping rule. I personally myself, I go to about 2 months. If a patient really hasn't had any impact, I don't waste time. I usually take them off medications and switch them over to something else. Certainly, they've got phobias to needles. Using tablets is a good option. Side effect profile too will affect if they're a very gut type patient, then using Liraglutide is not so good. If they get very affected by memory and cognitive sort of stuff, topiramate is not such a good option either. Also look at other medications they're on and your relationship with your specialist. If you have a good relationship with your psychiatrist, it makes your job a lot easier. If you have a good relationship with your endocrinologist, it also makes your job easier. So it's really important you establish good relationships. And if you don't, try and find some good relationships that you and your patient will share. Really important that they need to be reviewed. If we're going to try these medications, they need to be reviewed. It's not a take this medication, come back in 3 months type of strategy. Now, combination therapy is something I think you can consider, but before you consider that, I think you need to be confident individually with each of the 4 different medications. Before I started doing combination, I only prescribed single therapies for a good 6 months to a year until I knew these drugs really well. Now I would say 50% of my patients I do use combination therapy on. So what are combinations I use? I think I saw a question that asked about topiramate and phentermine. That is a combination that is available in America. I certainly have a small number of patients on it. As mentioned, I do have a mental health population, so I can't really use phentermine, but I know that if you don't have mental illness, it can be a very powerful combination. So they can be used together and they work differently. And so what I would do is I would start off on one, usually something like topiramate, get to the highest dose I can with that one, and then add in something like phentermine. So why would I use combination therapy? I would use it because of cost. So if people can't afford liraglutide, they might go on a 1.2 milligram of dose of liraglutide. They might add on maybe a 50 milligram dose of topiramate. And certainly I don't do this, but I know Joe Prioto does a lot of combination also with phentermine, all 3 of them together. I certainly use a lot of combination with liraglutide and topiramate, and I find that combination therapy works well because they work differently on different systems. So that helps with getting costs down. It also helps with side effect profile. So if they're getting significant side effects on one or the other, you can then hold it on that dose and add another one in. Certainly the third reason why I would use combination is if they need both. So my patients with olanzapine and clozapine, they will need 3.0 milligrams of liraglutide, and they'll also need 100 milligrams of topiramate. I think, once again, I will emphasize, this is something you would do if you were confident in single therapies. So I think get to know your single therapies well, and when you feel confident in doing that, you can try with some combination therapy. No different to blood pressure medications, no different to diabetic medications. When one doesn't work, we add in another. So I think that we can get a lot more traction with that. The role of pharmacotherapy in weight maintenance, often patients will plateau at 6 months. I find that using a new agent or post-therapy usually helps, or combination therapy helps as well. So switching from agent to agent can certainly help when patients plateau, and ensuring that you do things like things that enhance and maintenance with very low calorie diet, high protein diet, and lifestyle as well. Patients always want to come for medications, but there have been significant studies that show that if patients stay on medication, they have better long-term outcomes. This is very hard for patients to accept, but as we know, we have moved on to saying that obesity is a chronic disease. And patients with diabetes and high blood pressure, we keep them on medications. If we stop these medications, often their diabetes will go back to getting worse and their blood pressure will go up. So there was a really interesting study where liraglutide was added in after patients had lost 1 year, had lost weight after 1 year, and it showed that there was moderate results in improvements in cardiometabolic risk factors. So not only improved the weight, but also risk factors. Now, I often get asked, how do we get people with medication? So even though we say the longer they stay on it, the better, I use a 5% ceiling approach. So if a patient has decided that they're happy on 80 kilograms and they want to come off medication, I would tell them, you need to work at what 5% of your weight is. So 5% of 80 kilograms is 4 kilograms. If they hit that ceiling of 4 kilograms, I tell them they need to go straight back on medication again. And then they may stay on medication for whatever period of time, and then we put that ceiling approach again. Look, there will be some patients who keep bouncing off and on to that ceiling, but at least they know that they're keeping their weight under control and not letting that weight regain come out of control. My patients are quite happy doing this, and it's good for them to see the benefits of what the medication is doing. Certainly I've been successful in getting patients off medication using this approach, but for others they do certainly need a bit more work. Now, Georgia went through this in great detail last week that obesity is a chronic disease. We've mentioned today, we've seen the hormones, we've seen the genetics that Priya spoke about. We've seen how hard it is to keep weight off. We've seen all the medications we need to use. So there's no doubt that obesity is a complex, lifelong, progressive, costly, genetically related, multifactorial chronic disease which needs sustained long-term management. All chronic diseases need a multimodal approach, and often we may need to mix the interventions that we use. We might need to use pharmacotherapy, mix with surgery, mix with lifestyle. We need to sometimes combine these strategies to manage this chronic disease. Now, very briefly, recall systems. I know that all of you have very good software that can help with that. So the guidelines, the red book that we have from the I think this is a college publication. So very useful publication that recommends that we should be screening waist circumference and BMI every 2 years. Or you could use the Edmonton scale that Priya taught us about earlier. Yearly, patients with risk factors such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, stroke, gout, liver diagnosis, or high-risk groups yearly, and every 6 months who are already diagnosed. Very quickly, I know we have we're running out of time here. There are some drugs in the pipeline. I still believe we should get to know the drugs we have currently now, use them well before we even start thinking about other drugs. Because if we use the drugs we currently have, the 4 that we mentioned, I believe we can actually get good results. So the phentermine and topiramate combination, that's available in America. If you want to read about it, I put the studies all down the side. Interestingly enough, there's a selective 5-HT2C receptor agonist. Now, when I spoke before about psychotropic weight gain, I spoke about the blockage of the 5-HT2C receptors, which cause hunger. Well, this is an agonist. So you can see it's having the opposite effect. And of course, this drug I'm very interested in. I see a lot of binge eating. There's a naltrexone bupropion combination. This is meant to be working on the reward center and the mesolimbic part of the brain. So these are all in the pipeline, but as I said, I think we should be getting to know the drugs currently before we start thinking about the future drugs. In conclusion, as we found, there is no one best medication. I think you need to be choosing it on comorbidities, cost, patient preference, and goals. The key point is, if one doesn't work, don't think there's a failure. And remember, we're not allowed to use that word. I remember Georgia was very upset when her medical students were using the F word. So we call them non-responders. Try another one. With other chronic diseases, when people's blood pressures are not under control, we don't just give up and say this doesn't work. We actually try different medications. You'll be quite surprised. A number of times when liraglutide hasn't worked, I have found topiramate to work, and vice versa. It often is that they work on different parts of the body. And also remember that it's not going to be plain sailing. There will be relapses. As mentioned, know and use the common anti-obesity medications first, and then look at combinations. And also celebrate non-weight goals. Things like improvements to them, to their health, to their metabolic dysregulation, also to whether they can be compliant with some of the psychotropics. There are significant non-weight goals that we can celebrate, and keeping in mind that their goals unfortunately may be mismatched with our goals, but at least if we can help them see that it's not all about the weight, especially if we can promote weight maintenance, it's a really important goal to meet. I think we have to review patients regularly, we have to communicate with specialists, and keep remembering that this is a chronic, relapsing, progressive condition, and it does need a multifactorial approach. So we've got some time now for questions. I know Priya's been busily answering as many as she can.
We've got heaps of questions, but a lot of them are on a similar theme. So I wonder if we start from the top and cover some of the ones related to the physiological adaptations, and then we will go down to the ones about the pharmacotherapy. So there's a question, what's the role of low-carb diets in hacking this appetite system? So there is no evidence about specific types of diets being able to get around the physiological adaptations, except that a ketogenic, very low carbohydrate diet, the ketosis does reduce appetite, and it's partly related to an effect on preventing the rise in ghrelin that happens when, you would otherwise expect to happen with weight loss. So ketogenic diets in particular, in the short term, do suppress the rise in ghrelin, do have a beneficial effect on mitigating the increased hunger that usually happens when people are losing weight, but it's very hard to stay on a ketogenic diet forever, and people really love carbs, so it's very hard to be strict with it and stay in ketosis in the longer term. There's one about if the hormonal change is more significant with different slower rates of weight loss. Is it just because people are losing weight quickly? So no, we have done a study comparing a rapid, so 15% weight loss over 3 months or over 9 months, because there is a common perception that people who lose weight rapidly will then put it back on more quickly, and that's not true. The weight regain is the same, the hormonal changes are the same. So it's not the rate of weight loss, but the degree of weight loss that's important in the hormonal changes. Does leptin have a place in weight management? Well, interestingly, most of the physiological adaptations that happen with the weight loss, a lot of the hormonal changes, a lot of the energy expenditure, do reverse when you replace the leptin to replicate the pre-weight loss leptin levels, but leptin is not available as a therapeutic. It did start getting developed and investigated, but people develop antibodies to leptin, which then stops the leptin from working. So leptin is not available for this purpose at the moment, and as far as I know, it is not being investigated anymore for a place and in obesity management. Will 5% be enough to trigger the hormonal changes? Yes, 5 to 10%. Definitely 10%, and we've actually done a study recently looking at when the hormonal changes are triggered, and it looks like a lot of them are triggered at 5% weight loss. So even small degrees of weight loss that we're trying to aim for do bring about these hormonal changes. So we're moving on to the medication section of the questions now. So a lot of them are about side effects. All listed out are the side effects tolerated by patients. I think you've largely covered that.
Yeah, look, I don't personally use a lot of it, and a lot of patients don't actually come and see me about all this stuff. You can buy it over the counter. So I actually don't see these patients. Certainly when it was used more, 10 years ago, patients did find that they were fecal incontinent, and that's why I did put that picture of the nappy there. Not as a joke, but I think it's a real thing. I think that if you're happy to poo in your nappy, then you can tolerate it. But personally, I think there are better medications out there.
There's a lot of questions about the cost of the medications, particularly the retaglutide. You did cover that, but do you want to just mention again what the cost is and what the cost is at the different doses?
Sure. So my understanding is liraglutide is $387 a month. If people have private health insurance, they can claim back somewhere between $30 and $80 as a non-TGA TGA-approved non-PBS medication. So it's not a lot. There's no doubt that cost is the biggest barrier, but I think the key point is you don't actually need to use the highest dose for it to work. As mentioned, I've got some patients on 0.6. I've got quite a few on 1.2, a great majority on 1.8, and really only my really larger patients who are on significant antipsychotics and antidepressants need the 2.4 and 3.0. So if you divide 387 by 5, it's roughly about $70 odd or $75 depending, you get a rebate. So you can negotiate that with the patient. You can say, look, how much do you think you can afford? If you think this medication is going to work on you, or we want to give it a go, perhaps we will budget up maybe $150 a month and go on 1.2. So I would go on that and start off on that. And if it's working for them, then you stay on that dose. If not, you could then add in something like a topiramate, and at $13 to $20 a month. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of each for that to work. So I think it's a matter, I think the key point is you don't think of it as a food cost. See if you can negotiate with the patient what they're willing to spend and see whether you can work within their boundaries. If cost is a real barrier, I think you guys should try Topiramate. I really do.
And the Duramine, I know you don't use much of it. Do you have an idea of the cost?
Mine's $80 to $100.
It's about $100. So
Yeah.
at the lowest dose of the liraglutide, which is about $77 a month, it's similar or a bit cheaper than Duramine, except they have to pay the $387 to get the product, but then it lasts 5 months if you're using the lowest dose. And then it's $387 a month at the 3 milligram, which is the recommended dose or company recommended dose.
Do you have many patients on 3.0?
No, I have nobody on 3.0.
Okay.
Largely because, I work almost entirely in the public system and nobody can afford it. But even so, people do get, we're not, the DGA recommendation is to use it at the 3 milligram dose, but people do start getting an effect at lower doses.
Yeah. No, as I said, I have a lady who's on 0.6 because she didn't listen to me when I told her how to use it. She came back to me after she missed her 3-week appointment with me and came back to me at 6 weeks, and she was still on 0.6. And she had lost about 10 kilograms. So I was really, really surprised. And when I saw it, I thought, well, maybe I should try, not going up so quickly. It's a drug that can be used at various different doses, and you don't have to go up to the 3.0 milligrams. And I must admit, the ones I do, I have quite a few of 3, but they're people on olanzapine and clozapine, and they're also on 100 milligrams of Topiramate at the same time. So without that, I think you can try lower doses and try combination therapy as well.
None of the medications are on the PBS for weight management. So that was one of the other questions. None of these medications are PBS subsidised for appetite reduction. There's a question about, do you only use medications in people that you think the obesity is not related to their poor diet and lack of exercise?
I use medications usually because, look, I think if a patient has not got a good lifestyle basis of diet and exercise, I would certainly encourage that first. But if you're trying to look for that 5 to 10% weight loss, diet and exercise may not get you there. So I think that if they've had a good go at diet and exercise and they haven't got the 5 to 10%, I will use medications then. And certainly because it will also help the weight regain. I think, did I answer that question?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, look, it's a hard one. I think you've got to gauge what a patient really has tried. Look, I don't see the McDonald's eating, sit on my bum all day patient. Obviously, if you see them, you wouldn't put them on Liraglutide or Duramine. You would get them to change that first. But the patient who really is trying, and probably my biggest clientele would be a mid-40s lady who's menopausal, who's doing 3 personal training sessions a week, is doing organic food, is making everything from scratch and can't lose a single kilogram. For her, no doubt medication is going to work for her. And I see a lot of those patients. I know they're trying. So certainly for them, medication would work. So I think we've run out of time now. So so firstly, we would. Are you going to do that, Sally?
Yeah, I can do it. So thank you so much, Marlene and Priya, for a fantastic presentation. We really appreciate the time and effort that you've put in to present tonight.